Thank you very much. I want to just begin by apologizing again the fact that we don't have a sign language interpreter today. We learned today that none, as the other day, none was available. So we'll be posting a video with captions and ASL interpretations, as well as the text transcript online. So we'll be getting this information out far and wide today. I want to begin with the latest COVID numbers. In Massachusetts, as of yesterday, Monday, 765 new confirmed cases. Bringing the total of confirmed cases in Massachusetts to 136,933. There were 13 new deaths yesterday, bringing the total of deaths in Massachusetts to 9,401. In Boston, as of yesterday's numbers, we had 98 new cases in the city of Boston, bringing a total in Boston to 18,136 cases. We had 4 new deaths yesterday since Friday. That's a three-day total, bringing our total deaths to 768. And we just ask everyone to keep those that are sick and suffering and the families with COVID-19 in your thoughts and prayers. And for the loved ones that you've lost, we want you to know that we're thinking of you every day here. The data for the week ending October 5th, we remained at the somewhat elevated rate of activity that we've seen over the past few weeks here in the city of Boston. The positive tests went down from about 73 new cases a day to about 69 new cases per day, but testing also went down slightly in the city of Boston. 1,725 Boston residents were tested each day, an average of last week. So our positive testing rate has held steady here for a couple weeks now in the city at 4.1%. Neighborhood data, Dorchester 02121, 02125 had the highest rate of COVID positive testing in the city last week, followed by Hyde Park. Cases in East Boston went down to 6.5%. Last week, if you remember, I think it was 8.9%, so we've seen a decrease there. Dorchester 02122, 02124, Roxbury, South Boston, and other neighborhoods are at over 4% positive rate in the neighborhoods. Young adults and the Latino community continue to see the highest number of new cases in them. We continue to focus on multilingual outreach all throughout the city and access to testing and healthcare in these communities and in every other neighborhood that we have in the city. I'm announcing today that we have launched a second mobile testing site. The first team is in partnership with East Boston Neighborhood Health Center. Right now it's in Central Square in East Boston until October 21st. So anybody that wants to get a test, you can go to Central Square and you can get tested. Our new team is a partnership with the Whittier Street Health Centers. Right now it's in Nubian Square in Roxbury until October 24th as well. In addition, CVS has began testing at 2 new sites on Friday in neighborhoods with elevated rates. They are now testing at the pharmacies on Saratoga Street in East Boston and at Gallivan Boulevard in Dorchester. In all, we have nearly 30 active testing sites across the city. If you go to boston.gov/coronavirus, we have a map there. If you have an iPhone and you just, on your map app, just punch in coronavirus testing, and the testing locations where you are at that moment will be on the map. We're going to continue to monitor and share the data. We'll continue working closely with our healthcare experts and our medical community, and we're bringing resources and information where it's needed the most. But we can't get these numbers down without your help. We're asking people to wear masks. We're asking you to wash your hands with soap and warm water as often as possible. We're asking you to clean commonly touched areas such as your car doorknobs, or if you're in work, your office doorknobs or your home doorknobs. We're asking you to keep physical distance from other people. We're asking you to avoid gatherings, especially large parties. And I'm also suggesting that you get a flu shot. If you haven't had a flu shot, I got one on Friday. If you get a flu shot, obviously with the flu this year, it's going to be complications with deciding. You might think you have the coronavirus, you have the flu, so getting a flu shot keeps those numbers down. Today, as you can see, I'm joined by our Police Reform Task Force, chaired by U.S. Attorney Wayne Budd. I'm also joined by Boston Police Commissioner Willie Gross and some members of his team. Chief Equity Officer Carolyn Crockett and members of the administration here at City Hall. 4 months ago, I stood at this podium right outside that door, and I talked about what we need to do in our city. I was clear that we must dismantle systemic racism and build up equity and justice for every resident of our city. Justice in economic opportunities, justice in education, justice in housing, and justice in public safety. We must be a city where every single person receives equal protection and equitable opportunities. That is the belief that unites us as Americans. It's what every human being is owed. It's the only way that we can move forward with the unity and strength that we need to meet the challenges that face us at this time. We've talked about it for a long time. We've made some progress, and I'm proud of the progress that we've made here in Boston. But we've seen this year we have long ways to go. The desperate impacts of COVID-19, the terrible incidents of violence against Black Americans all across our country, and the powerful and passionate response in the communities of Boston. They combined to create a new sense of urgency. I'll repeat what I said since then. This time, we must and we will sustain the urgency and turn it into transformational systemic change. That's why in June we declared racism a public health crisis in the city of Boston. We shifted funding into health equity, trauma response, eviction prevention, and community-centered programs. We strengthened the use of our police force policies in the Boston Police Department. We restructured city government by placing a chief of equity in my cabinet to drive this work forward every single day. And that was just the start. I also appointed this task force that's behind me to review police policies and procedures, to take community input and work with the community, and to present recommendations and actions for reform. It's made up of incredible, outstanding individuals from Boston's Black and brown communities. They're leaders on civil rights, experts on public safety, activists for racial justice. Since forming this summer, they have researched the issue both here in Boston and around the country and seeing what other cities are doing or not doing. They have held 4 public listening sessions on key issues of accountability, diversity, use of force, and transparency. They took on board written testimony in many different languages. Hundreds of residents made their voices heard. The task force shared draft recommendations last month. They took public input through an additional listening session. Now they've completed and shared with me their final recommendations. And as of today, I'm pleased to officially accept these recommendations, all of these recommendations. We have them translated into 5 different languages in addition to English, and they're available at boston.gov/policereform. They are comprehensive. The recommendations are bold and comprehensive. They call for an Office of Police Accountability and Transparency with full subpoena power to investigate misconduct. They call for a diversity and inclusion unit in the Boston Police Department to work on representation and equity for officers of color. They call for continued expansion of the body-worn camera program and the continued ban on biometrical and facial recognition technology. They call for enhanced use of force policy that's absolutely clear, a disciplinary code that articulate a clear disciplinary code. They call for expanded public access to police procedures, policy procedures, and data of the Boston Police Department. And they call for all of these actions of these areas within a timeline of no longer than 180 days. As I've said before, I accept and endorse each of these principles. And today I can announce that I will use every tool at my disposal to make this a reality. Specifically, in the coming weeks, I will take the necessary actions to create the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency. It will house a civilian review board with subpoena powers to conduct investigations, and an internal affairs oversight panel that builds on and strengthens the existing co-op board. This week, I've directed my administration to create a job posting for an executive director of the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency so that we can create this office as soon as possible. In addition, I will immediately call on and direct Chief of Equity Carolyn Crockett and a cross-cabinet team of leaders to support the Boston Police Department in creating the Diversity and Inclusion Unit and uplifting their internal policies to ensure that they are all written through the lens of equity. Furthermore, this Monday I will be filing a home rule petition with the Boston City Council and ultimately at the state legislature to amend the civil service rules that govern police departments' hirings. This petition will establish a preference for graduates of the Boston Public Schools, METCO, or any schools in the Boston Compact which include charter and parochial schools in our city. This step will build on the success of our police cadet program by developing a new pipeline for diverse Boston residents into law enforcement careers. I look forward to collaborating with the members of the Boston City Council and the state legislature on each of these issues, as well as with the leadership of the Boston Police Department. These are bold steps. They will mark a new era in Boston in police practices and community relations. We are in a position to take these steps because we have the best and most trusted police department in the nation. These steps ensure that we will continue to have the best and most trusted police department in America. And I believe it will do more. At a time of national turmoil, and we are in national turmoil, Boston will offer a model of how to come together and move forward by achieving racial justice in our country. I want to just take a moment to thank each and every member of the task force for their leadership in this work and the work leading up to this work. I want to thank each member of the community who took time to share their views and their experiences. I want to thank each member of the Boston Police Department, starting with Commissioner Gross and his command staff and the officers that had their voices heard. I'm going to invite former U.S. Attorney Wayne Budd to come up and say a few words. Following Wayne Budd will be NAACP Boston Branch President Tisha Sullivan, followed by Commissioner Gross. And that will be the order. And then I have a couple more announcements, and then I'll open up for questions. So, U.S. Attorney? Right here.
Thank you, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. If you don't mind, I'd like to introduce the members of the task force to the folks who are gathered here this afternoon. And as I call your name, just raise your hand so that folks can identify who you are. So, Allison S. Cartwright, Attorney in Charge, Roxbury Defender's Office. Allison. Joseph D. Feaster, Jr., Chairman of the Board, Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. Tanisha Sullivan, President of the Boston branch of the NAACP. Darren Howell, President, Drive Boston Community Resources, Inc., and Political Coordinator for a local at SEIU. Superintendent Dennis White, Chief of Staff to the Boston Police Department. Marie St. Fleur, former state representative. Reverend Jeffrey Brown, Associate Pastor, Historic 12th Baptist Church in Roxbury. Eddie Crispin, Sergeant, Boston Police Department, and President of the Massachusetts Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers. Javier Flores, a partner at Dinsmore LLP. And last and certainly far from least, Jamal Crawford, a Boston resident and community advocate. Thank you. You know, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to offer my thanks and congratulations to each one of the task force members for volunteering and dedicating 4 months of their time and talent, as well as their energy and effort, which went into the preparation of the recommendations for the Boston Police Department reform, including its policies and practices, all to the end of identifying opportunities for improvement, all as requested by Mayor Walsh. We knew that accountability, transparency, and enforceability would be a very important part of the work that we were to undertake. And undertaking these tasks, we're under conditions that I can tell you, and I'm sure any task force member can, they're under conditions that were far less than ideal. We had tight time constraints, the COVID pandemic, countless hours of Zoom meetings, all while dealing with the difficult issues of policing reform and racial justice, which continue to roil the nation. This was all during the summer months, which made for true challenges indeed for each one of those different items. I'm pleased to say that each of us met those challenges head on and through a true team effort completed the assignment in a timely fashion. Despite frequent vigorous debates, all work was accomplished while maintaining respect and regard for one another. And each member, having brought different perspectives and experiences to the table, made meaningful and significant professional contributions to the work. And in spite of the various obstacles encountered, we were able to reach consensus on the issues and came up with an excellent set of well-documented recommendations of which we can all be justifiably proud. It must be mentioned that, as the Mayor mentioned, we received significant input from the community. The task force hosted 4 public listening sessions to gain thoughts and ideas on issues related to our work. And after the first draft of the report was issued, which, by the way, had been translated into several different languages, we held a 5th public session for feedback on that draft. Literally hundreds participated in these sessions. I might add that we're most fortunate to have the assistance of Muriel Sanchez Esquire, who on a pro bono basis served so ably and effectively as legal counsel to the task force. We also had available to us the excellent administrative support of Chief Jerome Smith, Kate Swain Smith, and Faiza Sharif from the City of Boston. Now, you know, there may be some who say we went too far with our recommendations. Others who might say we didn't go far enough. In my view, however, we have more than met expectations, and we have no doubt that our work will prove to be of great value to the Mayor, the citizens of the City of Boston, and perhaps the communities well beyond. I am proud to have been a member of this task force, and on behalf of the task force, we thank the Mayor for giving us the opportunity to perform this public service, and, as importantly, for his commitment to take early action on the recommendations we have put forward. We undertook our work with the idea in mind that this would be the case, and we remain confident that this work will prove to be more than just a report sitting somewhere on a shelf gathering dust. Thank you very much.
First, I want to also thank the Mayor for really demonstrating a commitment to this work by establishing this task force, and of course, Police Commissioner Willie Gross for his support of the task force as well. I want to, Chairman, I have the opportunity, I'm going after Chair Budd, so I have the opportunity to thank him for his leadership on this task force. This work was incredibly challenging, and he certainly led us to the end of this process in a way that we do believe helps to bring about transformative change as it relates to policing accountability and transparency here in the City of Boston. That was no easy feat, and so certainly want to thank you, Chairman Budd, for your leadership. And also, of course, to my fellow task members and task force members in our community, that was an integral part of this process. We were very intentional about wanting to make sure that community voice and community will was a part of what has ultimately become our final recommendations. I too want to thank Jerome Smith and his team for their support, and in advance want to thank Dr. Carolyn Crockett for the leadership we know she will demonstrate in helping to make sure that these recommendations are implemented with integrity, so that we can ultimately see the change that we're hoping, that we are seeking. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge Rep. Tyler for being here with us today. We know that the State House is also looking at policing reform. Okay, and so today we're hearing from the City of Boston on policing reform, but there is unfinished business too at the State House, and so we thank you for your leadership and hope that this work can help to serve as a catalyst to getting that work across the finish line. So I do want to state that this work, these recommendations really are the culmination, I shouldn't even say culmination, they really are the outcome of years of advocacy and activism that has happened in this city around policing reform and accountability. And that work, because of that work, we had a very solid foundation to build upon. And really, that work has allowed us to meet this moment in a way that we are standing before you when we were able to present to the mayor recommendations that are not only innovative and bold, but they really do push us even further than we thought was possible even a year ago. And so I do want to acknowledge that our work is not, this isn't just about us. It really is about the advocates on the ground and the activists on the ground who have been pushing for these changes for decades in some instances. I also want to acknowledge that this work that we were fortunate to be able to participate in is also, in many respects, hopefully seen as a response to the residents from across the city and also other members of our community who have been on the streets since June, really saying that enough is enough and that change must come. And so it is our hope that this work, that these policy changes really do, again, respond to their cries for increased transparency, accountability, and inclusion. These policy and structural recommendations, when implemented in full, will help create accountability structures that prioritize our individual and collective humanity while also respecting the dignity and worth of each member of our community. This is accomplished with a deep understanding and acknowledgement that it's not enough to say that racism will not be tolerated. We must actively, intentionally, and consistently work to make sure it has no place or space to take root. So today is just the beginning of the next chapter on this journey toward increased transparency, accountability, and inclusion. Now, we must work together to implement these reforms in full and again commit to the ongoing work necessary to ensure that they achieve the desired outcomes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for chronicling this historic occasion. I'm very proud of the work that was done by our panel. First of all, I'd like to thank Mayor Walsh. We had many discussions about police reform. We see what's happening across our nation. And as President Sullivan just stated, things continue to happen. Myself and the mayor, we had a serious discussion about police reform and 21st century policing. There was a list across the nation, A Can't Wait. We talked about how the Boston Police Department had already implemented those changes as touted by President Obama in 2015. As well, we have one of the top community police models in the country, but that is not enough. In 21st century policing, you must strive to continue to improve your department. So, the discussions about systemic racism, injustices, inequality, these discussions have to be had because as law enforcement, we serve the people. It isn't the other way around. But as law enforcement too, the officers are a part of the community, thus community policing. So we wanted to review our policies, our procedures, our rules, our regulations, and as well, take the recommendations from this esteemed panel. Thank you for the chair, Mr. Budd, one of my top mentors. Thank you to each and every panel member, including Superintendent White and Sergeant Crispin. What you see here before you are proud representatives of the community. So you have a former U.S. attorney all the way to a community activist, Jamal Crawford. You have people who actually go out and talk to people in this city. Thus the 5 meetings, the hours and hours of testimony that they took in to ensure that the voice of the people are heard. I accept the recommendations along with Mayor Walsh. I think it'll be fair to the community and the police, because we have folks here that saw not only through the eyes of the community, but what a difficult job it is for any police department in this great nation, and that can relay that if there's mistakes made in this nation by any police department, we can use that as teachable learning moments here in Boston that will contribute to our police reform. Again, we are not resting on our laurels. We need to strive, we need to go forward, and we need to work together. In the implementations of these changes and reforms and recommendations, I am very, very proud to have the opportunity to work with Dr. Crockett, our Chief of Equity. The good doctor will be working hand in hand with the Boston Police Department to review, again, our rules, our procedures, and policy. You've heard policy being mentioned several times. Policy is important because when we're not all here, the policy still should be in effect that no matter who takes office, that the people will be served well through a fair and just policy. Again, as Boston Police Commissioner, I'm looking forward to continued partnerships with not only this panel, but as well the good doctor. Again, thank you, Mayor Walsh. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank each and every person in the communities of Boston who took part in making these reforms. Thank you all. God bless.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I want to thank U.S. Attorney Wayne Budde again, Cesar Sullivan, President of the Boston Branch and NAACP, for your leadership, and to everyone that's here today. I also want to thank Representative China Tyler as well, who Representative Tyler is our lead sponsor of the legislation to bring a fire cadet program to the Boston Fire Department. So I want to thank her for her leadership and supporting many, many different issues in the city of Boston. So thank you, Representative, for your great work as well. After George Floyd's murder, and Tanisha references, the black community in Boston spoke clearly. They spoke on the streets. They spoke through this task force. Black and brown members of my administration spoke directly to me from the heart. They talked about the acts of violence that we see in the news. They talked about their own experiences that they feel every day and witness every day. They also spoke about fears and stresses and traumas that affect them right here in Boston and their families. And as parents, as spouses, as young people, as anyone who is in black or brown America, what I realized was doing better than before just isn't enough. Doing better than other cities is just not enough. We have to change the system that we inherited. And we have to change it in a foundational way to put an end to those experiences and inequities for good. It's deep, it's long-term work. It takes a long-term sustained commitment. We've shown that this year we can do that work here in Boston. We have sustained the urgency of a moment, and we have turned it into a new chapter. But as the task force makes clear in this report, this is also just the beginning. To accomplish these goals, the community has to help us, and the communities that set these goals before us. We must keep this sense of urgency alive and keep moving forward. We must keep working together. Elected officials, community leaders, activists, officers, residents, clergy, all of us collectively. I call on each and every one of us here in the city of Boston to play a positive and constructive role in this process. That's how we will move Boston forward, and that's how we will move America forward. Before I take questions, I want to update you on some of the work to keeping people in their homes after the state eviction moratorium expires this week on the 17th. This is a racial justice issue because evictions hit the communities communities of color the hardest, and especially women of color and their kids. It's a public health issue because housing instability will create conditions where the virus can more easily spread. So we are working with tenants and with landlords to make sure people can stay in their home when this moratorium is lifted. We are putting in place tools and resources. We mailed out, and I showed you at the last press conference, 46,000 at-risk households to let them know their rights. They're going to be arriving in your mailbox this week. We have an ordinance at the City Council that requires landlords to provide information about tenants' rights and resources. There's a hearing tomorrow, and we hope it'll pass before the moratorium is lifted. This isn't a political issue. This is about keeping people in your home, so we need that ordinance to pass tomorrow. We are reopening our rental relief fund, which already has 1,000 families in it. That support goes directly to landlords and encourage them to look into it for their tenants. So any landlords that are struggling now, and you know your tenants are struggling, go to the City of Boston website, call the Department of Neighborhood Development for the rental relief fund. New applications will be available on October 19th when the moratorium is lifted. We also have a housing stability pledge. More than 30 large landlords across the City of Boston have signed an agreement to avoid evictions in the City of Boston. We're going to have more to share moving forward. The state yesterday announced new resource. I believe the governor talked about it a little bit today at 12 o'clock at his press conference. We are working to make sure that these resources reach Boston tenants and property owners. I want to be clear that we have a city resources for homeowners that can also help small landlords. So we're working with the landowners as well. So if you have property and you're having a hard time, contact the City of Boston. I encourage you to reach out to the City of Boston Home Center if you're concerned. And the most important things for renters and tenants to understand, the CDC has a national moratorium in place until the end of this year. Tenants need to fill out a form and give a signed copy to their landlord to receive that protection. We stand ready to help you with that as well. So for more information, we want you to contact our Office of Housing Stability or 311. Any questions or any forms that I'm talking about today that you need help with, you can go to boston.gov/housing-stability. That's boston.gov/housing-stability. Or you can simply call 311, ask for our Office of Housing Stability for us to help any way we can. With that, I'm opening up to questions to the press.
Mayor, you talked about learning from other communities. Breonna Taylor taught us that no-knock warrants, especially on a drug case, can lead to death. Is there anything in this report about that, or police procedures for the use of deadly force?
Okay, that's that.
So as I have forestated, we reviewed everything, including our use of force policies and our rules and regs. So that's definitely been discussed. But I'd like to remind you, as a former supervisor of detectives and having several hundred court cases, you can't just write an affidavit in support of a search warrant and be granted a no-knock warrant without the approval of a judge and the district attorney. So what's put in place is to make sure any affidavit in support of a search warrant has the criteria that would meet that. But again, this has to be reviewed by the district attorney as well as judges. But everything was discussed, to my knowledge.
Yeah, it's also going to be in the. It's also going to be reviewed in the use of force. So in the section, the use of force section, that's one of the recommendations. All of those rules and procedures will be reviewed, not just one time, but I believe they call every year to be reviewed. So it's going to be reviewing these different cases every year in the use of force policy. They're banned right now in the City of Boston. Yeah.
We've never had those.
We never had them.
How are the recommendations being received from the rank and file? Will there be any need to negotiate with union?
No, there's really no aspects that I am aware of per se right now off the top of my head that's to be negotiated. We need some state laws changes. I think that there's a section in there, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, maybe Eddie can jump on this. We need legislation to change the civil service test. And the only other recommendation, at least it was in the draft, I didn't see the final, there was some disciplinary action that wouldn't allow you to be promoted in certain areas. I think that is somewhat of a collective bargaining agreement, and the body camera is obviously a collective bargaining as well. Listen, I think that there's a lot of uncertainty right now in the world, and as you know, I was talking to the task force upstairs, and right after 4 months ago, some of the folks that work with me said you're going to have to make some very uncomfortable decisions and decisions as you move forward here in the city. And one is a civilian review board with subpoena powers. And I thought to the moment in time where we were at that particular moment, and I realized that I don't know how difficult that's going to be. And this task force has made that understanding and that acceptance of this part of the recommendation easy, because there's accountability in the process. And I think if you are a police officer today, your job doesn't change the way it happens tomorrow. What this is an ability for people that want to take a complaint out in excessive use of force to have an opportunity to take that out, to know that they're going to have a process that's going to take no longer, I believe, than 90 days, according to, we're going to have a transparency data board. I don't think anyone has a reason to be afraid of this. This should not be, oh, here we go again. This is something that we can do in Boston. And again, if you're an officer or sworn officer in Boston Police Department, and there's no reason for you to have to come in front of this board as long as you do your job the way that 99.9% of our police officers do their job in Boston.
Can you talk a little bit more about the body camera expansion and what that might look like?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I'm going to have somebody else come up here and talk about that in a second. But a year ago, 2 years ago, we didn't have body cameras in Boston. And the whole conversation was around, we need body cameras, and we were able to work something out and have body cameras in Boston. And we began the process of bringing body cameras in. We're going to go the rest of the way, but there's a process we have to follow. But I'm going to ask somebody from the task force, Reverend Brown, to come up and talk about their thought process on the body camera, because I'd rather have him explain that to you.
So I would say that the body cam part of our report was in actuality the most widely embraced by the task force in terms of making sure that we had all uniformed officers with body cams. And in addition to that, there were some issues around the sharing of the footage to the families or to the next of kin of that families, and making sure that that happened. And then there are some languages about how accountability can be attached to that. And I think for me, the body cameras embody the community's cry for transparency and accountability, because it changes the game. And so it's no longer just a report that comes from a police officer, but you also have camera footage in order to judge the merit of a particular situation.
Just to go back to a previous question, most of this report can be done by executive order by the mayor's office. There will be some collaboration that we'll need to work with the city council on, and then there's some implementation that the commissioner can do, as we talked about today. So there's different aspects of this that can happen immediately and longer term. That's why the 180-day recommendation, I appreciate that, because when you talk about creating an office of accountability, an executive director, we're building up a whole new office here with staff and the right folks in it. So I appreciate the time that this task force gave us. Yeah, the civil service changes, I believe it adds 2 points to any Boston Public School graduate, Medco student, or schools that are part of the Boston Compact. So we just give kids that go through the system or graduate in a Boston Public School or in one of the compacts the ability to get 2 points for residency for all intents and purposes. They would be lifelong Boston residents, and to give them that opportunity. And so the way that works is an ordinance filed to the City Council. City Council needs to pass it. We send it up to the State House, to the legislature to hopefully get through the legislature. Thank you. It actually addressed it in this task force yesterday morning. Actually, I think it was yesterday. I spoke to Tanisha Sullivan. She called me, and we're talking about the story in the Globe, and we're talking about getting to the heart of the issue in the Globe story. And what she said was that there's a whole section here that gets to that as far as disciplined officers and transparency. And I think one of the issues in the past is also about transparency, not being able to get the information quick enough. And there's a section in this task force reform about transparency almost immediately. So we're going to be focusing on this issue moving forward because of this recommendation at the perfect timing. Oh, wait, one second. Come back one second, John. Great question. We don't know yet. So we're gonna. A lot of them don't cost money. Meaning, creating the Office of Police Accountability obviously is going to cost money. The other two boards are volunteer right now. We could look at that. Some of it is technology changes at the police department. Obviously, in the police department, creating a bigger office for diversity and accountability. That's going to cost some money from the police department. They're going to have to look at their budgets and how they do it. And so we don't have an exact number yet. We will get all that for you. It really depends upon. I mean, when I start this office of police accountability, it's going to start with a couple people. It could grow. I mean, we could have more people. I mean, we need investigators and things like that. So we'll get you all the numbers. We don't have a breakdown. At least I don't have a breakdown. Oh, Tanisha Sullivan, she might have a breakdown.
I don't have a breakdown, but I do want to. So on that question, I want to be clear in the answer, because we spent a lot of time as a task force talking about how these reforms would be funded. And in the report, in the recommendations, when you received the final recommendations, it was actually in the draft as well, we were very clear that with respect to those recommendations that relate specifically to the current BPD, that our recommendation is that the BPD does look within at opportunities to restructure or reorganize itself to meet the needs there. And I want to be clear on that point, because I want to make sure that folks know that we as a task force have heard from our community about the concern around the police department budget, right? So our recommendation does speak to leveraging existing resources within BPD to make some of these internal changes, with an understanding that, when we talk about setting up a separate office, which is the separate and apart from the BPD for the OPAT, that may, in fact, will require some resources.
Commissioner, as a leader, as a cop, as a man of color, how serious is the problem of racist police officers on your force? I know you say you're better off in a lot of departments, but how serious do you think this problem is, and how do you root out the bad actors?
First of all, thank you for that question, and I wish you could have heard my entire interview when I gave the history in Boston about systemic racism as pertains to when I first came on, to the Charles Stewart case, to the St. Clair's Commission, to what we're doing now. So right now we have processes in place that we will investigate any and all complaints about systemic racism. I'm reminded of a case in Roxbury Prep in Hyde Park. We fully investigated that. So long story short, we want to assure you that we're not the police department from the past. And what I talked about, I don't think got written, was this. Under this administration, we're striving to move forward and identify each and every case of racism, whether it's a police officer thinking that racial injustices are against them or members of the community. This is what I talk about when I'm talking about 21st century policing and going forward. This is what I'm talking about when we got to look at things through different eyes of these panelists to help improve our department so that whatever we're doing, we become a bigger and better department. As well, we have a diversity recruiting officer and exam administrator, Michael Gaskin. We're looking to expand that office to diversity and inclusion. And with the help of Dr. Crockett, we're going to be implementing changes that will definitely make sure that we don't fall back into the ways of the past when there was a consent decree placed on the BPD in 1974. So with 21st century policing, this includes the voice of the people. The panelists represent the people. We will listen to people. And let's not forget that our Boston police officers, who work very, very hard, are also included in that too. So more justice and equality for all. And thank you again to the panelists.
Let me just, I just want to, before I end, I just want to again thank the task force. These folks here spent a lot of time, of their own time, working and talking and working through processes, asking questions, and moving forward. And I just want to say how grateful I am and we are as a city for the incredible work that each and every one of you have done on behalf of the residents in the police department and all of us in Boston, and I truly appreciate it. With that, meeting adjourned. We'll go back upstairs and